We does not own the rights to these video clips. They have, in accordance with fair use, been repurposed with the intent of educating and inspiring others. However, if any content owners would like their images removed, please contact us by email, sapphire74130@gmail.com.
Few species leave as deep and terrifying an impression as the Yautja, commonly known to humanity as the predator. They embody a cosmic paradox. On one hand, they possess technology far beyond our understanding, capable of traveling between stars, systems that bend light for invisibility, plasma weapons with lethal precision, and medical devices capable of healing fatal wounds directly on the battlefield. On the other hand, their entire society and way of life revolve around seemingly primitive concepts. The honorable hunt, tribal rituals, and a strict, even extreme, code of combat. A society capable of constructing interstellar spacecraft reveres the taking of 10 trophies, skulls of their prey. A warrior who can calculate the trajectory of a plasma cannon is willing to discard all technological advantage to engage in hand-to-hand combat with their prey, armed only with their ancestral blades. This combination of advanced technological prowess and savage tribal culture is not accidental. It is not the product of a typical evolutionary process. It is a scar, a psychological remnant etched deeply into the DNA and culture of a species. To understand the Yautja, we cannot simply observe their hunts. We must look into their past, into a time when they were not hunters but prey. We must ask a fundamental question, a question the Yautja themselves would like to bury in the abyss of history. Who created the predator as we know them? Or more precisely, what force forged them in the fires of servitude, so that when they escaped, they became obsessed with the hunt? To prove they were never to be hunted again? The answer lies in a name rarely mentioned in the galaxy's chronicles. A ghost in the history of the cosmos. Amengi. Amengi were not only more intelligent than humans, but also surpassed all other advanced species in the universe. They did not belong to the humanoid or vertebrate categories. As we understand them, the most consistent descriptions indicate they were a form of life with a structure similar to Earth's cephalopods, but on a far greater scale and complexity. Their bodies are believed to have no internal or external skeleton. Instead, their structure is supported by a complex cartilage system and internal hydrostatic pressure, similar to that of octopuses or squids. The foundation of Amengi's strength lies not in mechanics or metallurgy, as traditionally understood, but in a field few species dare to touch: biotechnology and genetic engineering. For Amengi, living matter is not something to observe, but raw material to sculpt and optimize. Rather than building cities out of metal and concrete, Amengi may have cultivated them. Their spacecraft and even their equipment could be living or semi-living entities, genetically programmed to perform specific functions. An Amengi spacecraft could repair itself, adjust its internal environment, and even reproduce smaller ships. High-level genetic engineering allows this species to manipulate genetic codes to alter living organisms, even designing entirely new life forms from molecular building blocks. They can create biological tools, tiny creatures designed to mine minerals, living computers based on neural networks, or biological weapons that selectively infect and neutralize enemies. This ability made them efficient and terrifying slaves. The social structure of the Amengi remains a great mystery, but based on their biology and technology, we can hypothesize as follows. With the ability to communicate complexly without language and using neural connection technology, Amengi could operate as a collective consciousness, In such a society, roles may be determined at the genetic level, with subspecies of Amengi being born to be scientists, engineers, warriors, or leaders, perhaps with no individual ruler, but a massive biological entity coordinating the entire species, like an organic quantum supercomputer. To understand the profound impact of the Amengi, we must travel back in time to a world known as Yautja Prime. Before the darkness of the stars fell, this world was not a paradise. It was a harsh crucible, a survival arena on a planetary scale. The conditions here forged the primitive qualities of the species later known as Yautja. Yautja Prime was described as a world with higher temperatures and greater gravity than Earth, with an atmosphere rich in nitrogen and argon. Its double star system created a complex day-night cycle, and its weather conditions were extreme. The vegetation on Yautja Prime was full of predatory plants, fungi capable of exploding to spread spores, and vines that could strangle anything they touched. Life here had to fight for every beam of light and every drop of water. If the plants were dangerous, the animals were even worse. Yautja Prime was home to a variety of apex predators, each one the pinnacle of evolution in its ecological niche. In such a world, there was no room for weakness. Every day was a survival battle. The proto-Yautja had evolved to become the dominant predators, but it is important to emphasize that at this time, they had no advanced technology. They were a species in the Stone or Bronze Age, relying entirely on physical strength and innate hunting skills. Though they were perfect hunters in their environment, the proto-Yautja had a fatal flaw. They were technologically stagnant. Several theories attempt to explain this. Perhaps they were too successful with what they had. Physical power and hunting skills were enough to dominate the planet, so there was no evolutionary pressure to invent more complex tools. It could be that Yautja Prime lacked the types of metals or energy sources necessary to start an industrial revolution. All their intelligence and creativity were funneled into improving their combat and hunting skills, rather than into scientific or engineering pursuits. This combination of extraordinary physical potential and technological stagnation made Yautja Prime a perfect target in the eyes of the Amengi. The arrival of the Amengi on Yautja Prime was not a sudden invasion, but a carefully calculated process. A stage-managed drama that combined overwhelming technology, psychological warfare, and the sweet allure of gifts. This was a conquest of intelligence over brute strength. The first reaction of the Yautja, guided by their warrior instincts, was hostility. They threw spears, shot arrows, but their weapons were powerless against the organic, self-healing armor of the Amengi ships. The Amengi did not retaliate with violence. Instead, they deployed the first phase of their plan, showcasing their power in overwhelming and incomprehensible ways. They used their technology to alter local weather, creating selective acid rains or causing plants to grow at an alarming rate, forming a living wall to block the Yautja. Instead of killing, they used their technology to disable their high-frequency sound waves, caused excruciating pain, and temporarily paralyzed the Yautja's nervous systems, without leaving physical wounds. Genetically engineered spores caused temporary hallucinations, making the Yautja warriors fight each other. The goal of this phase was to undermine the psychological foundation of the Yautja. They were the ultimate hunters, but for the first time in history, they faced something they couldn't fight, couldn't understand, and couldn't even touch. Their confidence wavered, and a foreign emotion, fear, began to seep into the hearts of their bravest warriors. Once fear was sown, the Amengi moved to phase 2, the seduction. They didn't present themselves as masters, but as gods or messengers from the divine. They began gifting the Yautja tribes with technology, the most alluring of which were weapons. The Amengi had observed the Yautja and understood that the quickest path to their hearts was through enhancing their hunting abilities. They introduced primitive versions of technologies that would later become the hallmark of the predator, such as wrist blades, early plasma cannons, and medical devices like biological gels that could stop bleeding and accelerate tissue regeneration. These gifts significantly reduced mortality rates in hunts and conflicts. The Yautja, with their focus on hunting and combat, eagerly accepted these gifts, which made it easier for them to hunt larger, more dangerous prey. They felt an unprecedented sense of power, but they failed to recognize the price they would pay. These gifts were nothing more than invisible chains. The weapons and medical devices required energy, maintenance, and ammunition. The Yautja did not know how to create these things themselves, and they became entirely dependent on the Amengi to recharge their weapons and provide them with healing gels. The Amengi transformed themselves from strangers to indispensable providers. They did not distribute technology evenly, instead favoring certain tribes and leaders. This sowed envy and conflict in a society that was already highly competitive. Rather than uniting against the foreign invader, the Yautja weakened each other, creating the perfect conditions for the Amengi's dominance. As the traditional hunting skills of the Yautja began to atrophy after all, why spend days tracking prey when you can take it out with a single plasma shot? They became increasingly dependent on the gifts of the Amengi. The Amengi had gradually stripped the Yautja of their core identity, turning them from independent hunters into soldiers reliant on equipment. Finally, when the Yautja were fully divided and enslaved, the Amengi revealed their true nature. They were no longer gods offering gifts, but masters wielding control. The gifts became tools of subjugation, and worship was no longer voluntary, but compulsory. The conquest was complete, with almost no need for a single bullet. The Yautja, once the apex predators of their world, had become slaves in their own home. The age of slavery under Amengi rule was the darkest, most humiliating chapter in their history. Yet, it was also the most formative, shaping the Yautja's future. During this period, there was a name mentioned with the utmost respect: Kaail. Kaail represented the first Yautja to awaken fully. While his kin focused on the battle at hand, Kaail looked further ahead. He realized that the strength of the Amengi lay in the division of the Yautja. His plan was not merely a revolt, but a well-organized revolution. Kaail secretly began to ally with leaders from other tribes. The Yautja rebellion could not be a direct confrontation. They had no starships or heavy weapons. Instead, they had to use guerrilla tactics, leveraging the very skills the Amengi had taught them, and the harsh environment of Yautja Prime to their advantage. The Yautja knew their planet better than any Amengi, and they used that knowledge to lead Amengi patrols into areas filled with dangerous predators, toxic swamps, or ambush-prone valleys. They turned their planet into a weapon. The primitive hunting skills that had been fading were now reborn and fused with technology. Using the basic cloaking suits provided by the Amengi, the Yautja launched lightning-fast attacks, then vanished into the jungle. Each time a patrol was wiped out, the Yautja not only took their weapons, but began studying them. With their inherent intelligence, they learned to dismantle, repair, and even improve upon the Amengi's technology. They learned how to recharge energy cells, fine-tune plasma cannon systems, and disable tracking devices. Gradually, they seized control of their enemy's power. Kaail and other leaders realized that, despite their technological might, The Amengi were weak in close combat. An individual Amengi, with its soft body and no armor, was very vulnerable in hand-to-hand combat. The Yautja's tactics were simple: overcome the technological barriers and get close to eliminate the Amengi swiftly. When the time was right, Kaail sent the signal for a planet-wide uprising. From the arenas, labor camps, and distant forests, the Yautja tribes rose up in unison. The rebellion reached its climax in several great battles at the Amengi's power centers. After a bloody and prolonged war, the Yautja succeeded in overthrowing the Amengi's dominance on their planet. After driving out the Amengi, the Yautja found a massive treasure trove of technology. Instead of destroying it, they assimilated it, adapted it, and personalized it to serve their purposes. The greatest wound left by the Amengi was the shame of slavery. To erase this shame and ensure it never happened again, the Yautja created a strict system of social rules and ethics, a way of life etched deeply into every Yautja. Honor was everything. Only hunt worthy prey. Never hunt the weak. Acknowledge worthy adversaries. Take trophies, and self-destruct after 7 defeats.